Gracious God, take our minds and think through them, take our lips and speak through them, take our hearts and set them on fire with love for you. Amen. Amen. I don't know, maybe it's because it's Father's Day. Maybe it's because the gospel has to do with a storm. Maybe it's because we had a lot of storms all through the week. But I couldn't help but remembering all through the week a story back a long time ago when my kids were children with my own father, who died a couple of years ago. He lived with my stepmother on a large lake, and he had a sailboat. When I was growing up, he always told us stories about when he was a kid and loved to sail. But he always got motorboats with us kids. I don't know whether he didn't trust us on the sailboat or what, but I'd always wanted to be on a sailboat. And so we went down to Louisiana, 3 children, Jim, me, and we go out on the boat with my dad and my stepmother, Pat. And lo and behold, the wind starts kicking up. And Daddy was always a big one to tell me if I went out on the lake and it looked like a storm to get on home. And so I said something about that. He said, oh, no. He said, this isn't really a bad storm. I've been through worse than this. And he said, this is a good boat. We've got a little cabin. We've been through rain before in this boat. We take it on trips. Kids can go in the cabin if it rains. Don't worry about it. It's going to be fun. And so we kept going, and the waves kept getting bigger, and there was a little rain, and I kept wandering, but he said, don't worry about it, it's fun, it's going to be fun. Lots of fun. And so the kids were getting a little leery about it, so they went in the cabin, and I peeked in the cabin, and they were kind of huddled there. And I said, Dad, you sure this is okay? It's okay, Gayle. I know what I'm doing. You can trust me. This is fun. And I peeked in the cabin, and my son Paul, who's all grown up now, looked at me and said, Mom, if this is fun, I don't want any of it. And with that, I went back and suggested we go home. In a way, that was a peace be still. Our peace be still was to get off the lake at that time. But it's a situation kind of like that we hear about in the gospel this morning. Jesus has been healing people. He's been up all night. He's been going around the countryside. The crowds have besieged him, and he needs a little time away, and he's worn out. He's tired. You know how that feels to just be bone tired? He's tired, and so they're going to go to the other side, get away for a little while. And he falls asleep in the boat, the stern of the boat on a cushion. And while he's asleep, the waves kick up, kind of like they did on that sailboat, except more, and they're beginning to swamp the boat. Jesus is just snoozing away in the stern, and they're all looking around like, man, we're going to die out here. And so they wake him up, and teacher, what is it? Don't you even care that we're all about to die out here? And of course, Jesus, he's the Lord of creation, the Lord of wind and sky, as we sing about. And so he calmly gets up, maybe stretches a little bit, I don't know, and just says, peace, be still. And the wind and the sea obey him. Well, there are lots of ways to take that story. There's the way of just remembering that Jesus is Lord of everything. There's also the way of remembering that in our own lives there are all sorts of storms that come up, metaphorically. Storms of feelings that arise, anger, sadness, fear. And that even in those inner storms that we have, that we can always ask for help from Jesus, even if he seems to be sleeping. And to our own inner storms, he will say, peace, be still, and has the power to still our fears, and the power to still our anger, and the power to still our sadness. And so that's another way of seeing that story. But there's still another way of reading that story. And that is to be aware that as a whole, as a culture, we have many storms in our own culture. And there are many different things that are at the eye of those storms. Some of the storms that seem to sometimes threaten to swamp the boats that we're in with waves and wind that seems to be battering about. At the eye of some storms is the whole issue of human sexuality. At the eye of another storm is the issue of what does it really mean to take care of this good earth? What's overreacting, what's underreacting? That's another cultural storm. And as we were reminded last week, at the eye of the storm is something that we have fought for a long time in this country, and is still a storm that tears us apart. The storm at the eye of the storm of racism. And we saw how powerful the waves of racism run amok can be, how destructive, and how lives can be battered by it just last week. And so I think sometimes as we look at these cultural storms, I don't know about you, but sometimes I want to say, Jesus, where are you? You know, are you sleeping? Do you think you could wake up now and do what you did way back then on that boat and just speak to these cultural storms and say, peace, be still, and we could figure out how to deal with these issues in a different way? But then when I stop to think about that, I think it probably isn't because of Jesus that we're not finding the wholeness and the peace and the way to deal with it. I think it might be because of us. I think it might be because we tend to try to ride out the storms in our culture in boats that are very different boats than the boats that Jesus tends to ride in. We approach these storms, and one of the first things we want to do is, which side should I be on? Which side is right and which side is wrong? And then we quickly move to get on our side. And as soon as we are, we're going to fight it out with everything we have to prove that that other side's wrong. We're going to demonize them. We're going to tear them down. We're going to make sure everybody's afraid of them. We're going to slam them on Facebook in jokes and snide little remarks. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that people know that is wrong and we are right. And we ride in that boat and we stir up more waves and we stir up more wind and we stir up more storms. And in terms of racism, we can even stir it up to where some young man who doesn't really know his right hand from his left, as one prophet of the Bible once said, ends up being carried away with fighting for what he thinks is right. And that it's all right to kill these people because they're the enemy. It's not the same boat that Jesus rides. I want to remind us just of the account, basically, that we get. I pulled this together and kind of made it brief, and I want to read it, but I pulled it together from some different sources. On the evening of June 17, 2015, a mass shooting took place at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. The church has long been a site for community organizing around civil rights. 9 people were killed, including the pastor. The suspected killer appears to be aligned with white supremacist sentiments, and according to his roommate, has expressed his support of racial segregation in the United States and his concern that blacks here are taking over the world. According to a survivor of the shooting, prior to shooting his victims, the killer said, "You rape our women, and you're taking over our country, and you have to go." He was a man with purpose. That purpose was fueled by many of the things that we don't even realize we're doing that fuels that kind of hatred. It reminded me of something that happened in another church a long time ago. Back in 1963, Birmingham, Alabama. Remember what I'm talking about? Remember what happened there? 4 little girls died. Here's the account. On September 15, 1963, 4 young girls were killed by a bomb at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. The bomb was an act of white supremacist terrorism. 4 members of the Ku Klux Klan planted at least 15 sticks of dynamite attached to a timing device beneath the front steps of the church. The bomb exploded just before services began. 4 young girls were killed and many others were injured. Prior to the shooting, the church had been frequently used as a meeting place for civil rights leaders. That sound a little familiar? Emmanuel Church in Birmingham, A week before, George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, had told the New York Times that to stop integration, Alabama needed a few first-class funerals. Which he probably didn't mean 4 dead young girls by. It was probably political rhetoric. Run amok. One of the great spiritual leaders of that time, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was asked to address the bombings in Alabama, and he said this. He said, "We must be concerned not merely about who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderers." That would hold up today in relation to what we just witnessed in Charleston and what we witness continually over and over again in terms of racial violence that's coming up. We have a hard time staying with the thought of looking and having a conversation about the systems, the way of life, and the philosophy that produce people that feel it's okay to commit this kind of violence. Look how fast we moved from talking about this as a racial white supremacist act and what that meant and how culture may have helped to stir that. Look how fast we moved from that to an argument about gun control. Same day. We were no longer talking about race and what had happened in that church. We were talking about gun control. Look how fast we moved from realizing that this was a white supremacist act, just like the Ku Klux Klan was a white supremacist act. How quickly we moved to talking about the poor boy being having mental problems. Of course he had mental problems. So do most people that killed anybody. And that's not to say we don't need to address our mental health system. We do. It's another one of those systems we need to address. But look how fast we are to move to something else, then to the heart, to the eye of that storm, to the fact that racism, systemic racism is still alive and well. And ladies and gentlemen, not just in the South. We tend to think that once we get to this side of the Ohio River, we're all exempt from it, but we're not. We all play a part in it, whether we realize it or not. Every time we slam something on Facebook, and boy, political things are stirring up now, and instead of entering something on Facebook that says, I disagree with this person about this issue, and this is why I disagree with them. This is why I think that if we followed what they said, it would not be the best thing to do, and this is what I think we should be following. Instead of that, what do you see? This person is the enemy. He's the devil. She's the devil. She's stupid. She doesn't know what she's doing. People just slam each other. That's not the boat Jesus rides in. Should we be talking about the issues? Yes. Should we be disagreeing about them? Yes. Should we stand for what we believe and speak about it? Yes. About the issues. Not about encouraging a culture of disrespect. Not about encouraging a culture of fear-mongering. Martin Luther King was right. What we need to be concerned is about the systems that we all have a part in that encourage these kinds of acts and encourage people to take things farther than we ever would, but think that they've got our permission to do so. So here's the beginning. Do you know the difference between personal bigotry and systemic racism? Let me say it again. Do you know the difference between personal bigotry and systemic racism? Take a few weeks and go find out.